Careful what you say or you'll get convicted.
Yeah.
Right. Happy New Year. Welcome back. How you guys doing?
Doing good. Doing good. My shoulder's a little sore. I got my booster shot yesterday.
Oh, I thought it was because you lifted beer and rum all break.
Well, that muscle memory, man. That doesn't affect me. I can do that for days. Yeah.
Good deal on your shot, though, man.
Came downstairs and like I sat on the couch and I kind of rolled over to get the remote. And I was like, ow, ow. I was like a millennial. Ooh, ooh.
Just crying.
Oh, man. Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Let's see who is in the chat room so far. I see a Tim Vickers. We should get rid of that guy.
Yeah.
Hey, Melissa, asshole. John, Ryan, and also I would assume my sister Katie is with Ryan listening. Let's see, Cindy and Bob. How's everybody doing? Glad you can make it. Happy New Year. We're excited to be back. It was a nice 2 weeks off. I'll admit I enjoyed that. But all of us, I think we're getting a little antsy to get back into the swing of things.
Yep.
Because as I believe all three of us were off that week between, what was that, Christmas and New Year. And Kenny sends us a message. Hey, I got some questions for you guys. Can you jump on a StreamYard chat? We're like, sure. He's like, this won't take long. What the hell was it? Like an hour and a half later?
Famous last words. I'm thinking like, and you know what? My wife is so used to this because I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go up. I'm going to talk to the boys. We're going to talk for like, give me like 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops.
Yep.
You know? And yeah, you're right. Like an hour and a half later, we're finally wrapping it up because it just got, I love that kind of shit. When it gets so interesting, you just get into it right away.
Yeah.
You know?
That's kind of where the topic came from for tonight, because you had some questions around this 21-gram experiment weighing the soul. And as we got talking and looking into it, I think there was a lot of F-bombs dropped and what the fuck and what was he doing here and what are you thinking there? And we're digging into stuff. And yeah, after about an hour and a half, I think we decided it would be a good show topic. So I'll give Kenny credit for it. I stole it. I pulled a Tim on grabbing a topic here, but it's a good one. It's interesting. And I know, Kenny, I think you said that people have asked you about this topic and this experiment on your Skeptical Help Bar podcast that occurs on Friday nights at a new time, I understand.
Yes, 8 p.m. for anyone that didn't get the message.
Eastern,
right?
8 p.m. Eastern.
Yes, I've been posting all week, and it's still snuck by some people. Oh well,
it happens.
They still made it, so that's the important thing. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm actually excited to talk about this. This is it's an interesting topic. It's something that people bring up actually quite a bit, considering that the work was done from 1901 until the publication in 1907,
right? And
it still comes up a lot. So I got a couple opening comments here, and then I'll turn it over to one of you. So yeah, as I said, from 1901 until the publications that came out in 1907, there's a series of, it's really one experiment that this physician was weighing people when they died. And these were people who had tuberculosis. They were in the consumptive's home. I believe it was in Massachusetts. Tim and I were going back and forth on, what was it, Roxbury or Dorchester?
Yeah.
Massachusetts, in that area. It's Grove Hall. Blue Hill Avenue. It was a home where people would go to be treated and cared for with tuberculosis. The the person that did the study was Duncan McDougall. He was 34 years old at the time, a surgeon and a physician. He had 2 other physicians that were assisting him there. We'll talk about that. And basically what he did is, as people got close to death, he, of course, got their approval ahead of time. He would put them on, it sounded like Kenny probably, I think he had some information on the scale that we talked about when we were doing our initial discussion of this a week or so ago. They'd put a cot on a scale and a Fairbanks scale, and then they would monitor them. And it looked like, a couple hours before they died. And then when they died, they were looking for a loss of weight. So the reason they were doing that is because McDougall, his thought was, and I want to read this quote from him, quote, "It appears to me more reasonable to think that it must be some form of gravitative matter and therefore capable of being detected at death by weighing a human being in the act of death." He's talking about the soul or whatever part of the consciousness that might survive bodily death. So he would put them on the scale, weigh them, and as they passed away, figure out what, if any, weight loss there was. I don't want to get into too many details. I'm sure we'll talk through them. There's a lot of issues, concerns I have about the experiment, the way it was done, as I'm sure Tim and Kenny do as well. And hopefully tonight we can pick that apart a little bit and kind of see what we think of it and what you all think of it, answer any questions you might have, and then maybe talk about some of the more recent work, because there was a more recent study in 2001 where somebody else did work with sheep, goats, rams, and lambs to see if they would lose weight when they were euthanized. They were supposedly, from what I understand, the animal rights would get upset about this, but they were on their way, from what I understand, to slaughter anyway, so they euthanized them. It sounds like very peacefully, as most as you could, to euthanize an animal. So, all right. So JD has our first question, and we will get into this. At what rate does a soul leave the body? That's a good question, because they do talk about the rate of weight loss just prior to death, and then a rapid loss that McDougall recorded at the time of death. So that's all I want to say right now. So I am going to toss it over to Mr. Vickers.
Ooh, I'm still on the show. You didn't Vicker me
for now.
Failed.
It's a new year, new opportunity to get booted.
You get 3 more strikes.
3 more strikes. Actually, this was a very fun topic. For some reason, I've always known about this. It just kind of always flies under the radar for me. This experiment, I just kind of grew up hearing about it, and every now and then it would pop up in conversation, but I never really delved into it until Kenny sends us that message, and then we're Googling scales and where the hell this place was, and
satellites are firing up all around the globe.
Yeah, we're just like, what is going on? It was good as always. This was just fun. You guys are just so much fun. We come up with some idea, and I end up just having a ball with it. I think Dave really did a good opening with that. He really laid down a really good, great groundwork for that. So outside of that, there's not a whole lot more I'm going to add to that. But JD's question was a question that was very similar to mine, but not so much about that when the soul leaves. But one of the questions I kind of popped in my mind when I started researching it was, what was his definition of death? Like, what did he call death? Did he call death at the end of the heartbeat? I don't think that they probably had anything for brain monitoring activity, but there's a lot of different degrees now of what people want to call death. And it was just interesting to me. So with that, I'll give it to Kenny.
So yeah, I mean, this is one of my opening statement is probably going to mirror my ending statement. But this is one of those cases where a story becomes a legend and it becomes tribal knowledge within a community. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's just like you said, Tim, like we've all heard about this. It's come up in conversations. I've heard it at conferences, and whenever people start talking about death, especially in this type of community, this comes up. And it's always like said with confidence, like, oh yeah, soul, the soul is real, and it's 21 grams. And it's not until you start digging that you find so many flaws, so many inconsistencies, so many weird things with the story and what was actually printed or published, that you begin to realize, like, oh shit, this is dumb. You know, put it simply. And I hate using that word. I do use it once in a while, but this is definitely a case where it was dumb, because it's evolved over time. People use it. They cite this experiment with authority without even knowing anything about it.
Yeah, I was going to add, without even reading it.
Right. And it's common. It's very common. And it gets asked on my show on Friday nights a lot. And then it actually came up with one of the students that took the course that I did with Lloyd. He wrote his final essay on this, and he brought up some good points. And but the one that really bothered me was the weight, and we'll get into that. But the initial question, and when it comes up, I'll highlight it. But the initial question really is what launched our investigation that day. You know, like, why is it called this? Why is it called 21 grams? I don't get it. So
yeah.
Dave,
there you go. Here's my opening statements. I'm going to throw it back up to Dave, and there you go.
I think Dave's face said it all right there. Just he lost 21 grams of air when I
lost 21 grams when I reread the study. So quick question from Melissa, and we will talk about this. I should have refreshed my memory with the study, but during the study, was the evacuation of bodily fluids, etc., taken into consideration when factoring the weight after death? Yes. Yes, it was. And that's one of the few things I think he did do okay, is that part of it. The problem is I got a long list of problems with the study and the way it was reported, but one of the problems is there's a real lack of numbers, figures, analysis. Basically, it says we threw people on the scale and they lost this amount of weight, and the way he determined how much they lost is even questionable to me, which brings into consideration the studies done with goats and sheeps, because they saw a gain in weight and they actually saw a fluctuation, and then it would kind of go back to normal. And Kenny has probably looked into the scale a lot more than I have at this point, but the way it sounds to me, the way he set the scale up, if you're doing it so the upper arm goes against the upper block, if there's any weight gain, I don't know if he was going to be able to detect that. So you wouldn't see that transient increase, decrease, up and down like they may have in some of the other studies. But anyway, we'll pick through that. We'll pick through that stuff. So I think that's a good point and place to start, is let's talk about the setup. So I briefly described it. I said what they would do is as these tuberculosis patients got close to death, they would put them on this cot, which was hooked up to this Fairbanks scale. And I see Kenny has a picture of it ready to go here, and I'll add it to the stream when we want to dig into it. But then they would measure them, and sometimes it took a couple hours before they passed away. Other ones, and one of the reasons they threw out some of the data is they put somebody on the scale. They had to balance the scale. They had to make sure everything was good to go. And then somebody passed away within 5 minutes, I think, when they were still trying to get the scale set up. So yeah, there's a lot of issues, but I'm going to put the picture of the scale up. I'm going to make a few comments here, and then I'll hand it over to Kenny since he's got the picture of the scale. So these Fairbanks scales were supposedly the Rolls Royce of platform scales back in the 1830s through the first half of the 20th century. So they were pretty well known. They were a pretty good staple for scales back in the day. The particular one that McDougall used, as my understanding was, it had a 300-pound capacity, and it was accurate to within 0.2 of an ounce, which is about 5.7 grams, which I think that's how we started our conversation a week ago, is how does that impact the data? So I'll leave it at that. That's basically what they did. They recorded the weight loss. They recorded it beforehand. They recorded when they were laying there. The one thing I will say they didn't put in any of the papers. What was the patient's weight before they even started the death, I guess the death experiment, really, because you put them on the scale. What is their weight? How much did they lose? Because that factors in to how meaningful the changes are and the data is, the percent change. So, all right, Kenny, what do you got for the scale?
So as far as I could find, I couldn't find the exact model because I just couldn't. There's no record. I mean, even in the original paper where we went through, it doesn't actually list the model of the equipment. But we know about where we're dealing with, because he started the experiments in 1901. So and we're pretty sure, but not 100% sure, that this was likely a leftover piece of equipment from when the building was used as a textiles manufacturer. So it was weighing silk, like big rolls of silk, and it was converted. It was converted by McDougall himself. He built this wooden frame, and he used a cot, and I believe it was more like an army cot type of thing that they used. So I'm gonna just throw this in there. This is my bias, but it's a doctor that's trying to be a carpenter. So can we verify the accuracy of the scale? I don't think so. I really don't think so, because you're building a contraption. Is it calibrated? We don't know. We're just going off of what he's telling us. But this picture that you see up on screen, this is pretty much it. That's the kind of, I mean, this one is in bad shape, but this is pretty much what they were using, as far as we know. So you have the slider scale, and this presents a problem right away, because there's only a limited range. And I know we've all been on one of these.
Yep.
You know, when you go see the doctor,
they're all lying bastards.
Yeah,
every one of those scales.
Yes, but I mean, you have a range here, and he talks about it in the study, in the paper, about how it was set to within 0.2 of an ounce would make it hit the upper limiting bar. So right away, there's already this assumption that the soul, if it's there, is going to weigh no more than 0.2 of an ounce, because you can't weigh anymore without adjusting the entire scale.
You can't detect it for sure, because anything less than that, it's not going to register on there anyway.
Right. And this is, again, something else to note is this is not a digital scale. Obviously, this is analog, and a lot of it's open to interpretation, because
it was 1901.
Right. Yeah. You know, I mean, and although, you know, it's pretty good, you're judging the exact weight on whether you think this is balanced in the middle of this opening over here.
Right.
So is it accurate? Fuck no.
Didn't he to do the loss? I thought the way I read it is he would set it to where the upper beam locked against that upper limiting bar.
So that's one of the things I did want to bring up, because he has it here saying, let me see. Oh, because I noted here, is this a test condition? Because he says during all 3 hours, and this is on page 239 of the study. He says, during all 3 hours and 40 minutes of the first patient, I kept the beam end slightly above balance near the upper limiting bar in order to make the test more decisive if it should come. So already I'm questioning, like, it's not exactly on balance. It's above balance. So is that making it easier for it to move?
What does that even mean?
Yeah, I don't understand what that means.
According to him, it's slightly above.
But later on at the bottom of that page, because he starts talking about if the patient exhales and the loss of the air in the lungs, could that make up for the 3/4 of an ounce? And he says getting upon the bed myself, my colleague put the beam at actual balance. And they test it with him and the colleague, and they do the same thing. He repeats it, saying, my colleague got upon the bed, and I placed the beam at balance. So I guess, I mean, something we always preach is that if you're going to repeat an experiment, you do it exactly how it was done in order to see if you get the same results. And this doesn't sound like he did it exactly. He had two different conditions for his colleague and him, and then the patient. So I don't know. I don't know what variables or how much of each variable would affect this. Like we don't know what would. It's a fucked up experiment. It's just horrible. So yeah, that's my problem.
I mean, obviously, I think they were trying to do the best they could based on the equipment and what they had available back then. But being that it was a tuberculosis facility and consumptive facility, they were always measuring people because weight loss is a huge part of tuberculosis. So I don't think they would have used this though for the weight loss, because they would just get people on probably a normal scale at the time, as opposed to something that has a platform or a cot or anything on it. So I mean, yeah, they're used to doing weight loss for tuberculosis patients. They still do that these days because they monitor weight loss to see if you start gaining weight, you're actually doing better and you might be recovering. If you continue to lose weight, that's a big red flag. That's not good. My problem with part of this is you never got the starting weights for anybody. And honestly, I had to dig to get if it was male or female. There's just the amount or the lack of specific data was crazy. I mean, there's no physical data. There's no age. There's no weight of the people beforehand. There's no, oh yeah, and we left them on the scale for, let's say, 3 hours afterwards. Because if you put let's say the first patient was on there for 3 hours and 40 minutes before they began truly to pass away, why didn't you leave them on there longer to monitor for that amount of time afterwards as well? So to me, there's a whole lot of missing data. And again, no model number of the scale, no specs besides, it's 0.2 of an ounce accurate. And that's about it. No stats analysis whatsoever. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many problems, especially when you're dealing with something, as Kenny said, like this. It's if you're slightly off balance or off center. Okay, so what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, all right, Tim, you got anything to add to the scale?
That's that a little bit off center is exactly where I kind of went with too. Like, what does that even mean, and how do you account for it? And I don't know if anybody's ever. I know that you've been on this scale. There's been probably a lot of people on this scale, but this scale immediately brings back memories of me when I wrestled, and you would have to do weigh-ins, and nobody gave a shit. Like I remember, like, people would take flashlights and shine a light and see if a light went through. And if a light went through, then you met your weigh-in, no matter how close it was. But what does that mean? How many grams is that?
Right.
It's a strange measurement. I didn't like it. It felt like the whole thing was not very well documented. I agree with that. For me, I don't know why. I don't really have a basis on this, but along with like each individual person, I would like to have known like what their diet was, what their fluid intake was prior to, maybe days prior to. I don't know why. I don't know what information that could help with. But for some reason, I really want to know like their medications prior to death. It just feels like it would be good to know, especially diet. For some reason, I have this thought about flatulence and well, I've just, they accounted for the air in the lungs, but did they account for just escaping air in the bowels? They did fecal, I'm sure, and urine, but what about bloating from any passing gas? I know that's kind of weird, but it's just something that when you're going into grams, I would have liked to know a whole lot more about that. Another question I have.
I think that part of it they covered, or was it Mary Roach covered a little bit in Spook. They talk about the insensible loss due to respiration, and then she quotes a couple different people that have done a lot of work looking at people who eat a meal and then sleep, and they monitor weight loss. And I guess the whole reason they went into that is because the loss that you would get from just normal body respiration exchange, it's a slow loss. It occurs like we'll talk about it in the data, but when they looked at the first patient for 3 hours and 40 minutes beforehand, the loss was incredibly slow. The weight loss was incredibly slow. And what they point out with the data here, when they finally supposedly passed away, however they determined that, we'll talk about that. It was a rapid, it just dropped. So they don't think that accounts for it, but who knows?
Also, it seems like this is something I wanted to look today. Weren't there better, like something like a spring scale, just a better way to see movement than that? And maybe they just did what they could with what they had. Right. It seems like it would have been something better to actually have more accurate information, to have an actual dial.
I'm guessing it was probably due to expenses. You know, instead of actually buying a new scale, this was already there.
Yeah.
So let's use this, and I can build a frame and put it on there. Which that's my main concern. You know, if the frame wasn't built right, or if it wasn't large enough, or I don't know. I've never actually seen the original rig.
True.
So I don't know. I know that there's a sketch out there somewhere of it. But I have not been able to locate it yet.
I just have this, and you're right. I'm certainly not apt to design experiments like this, but I certainly have read many of them. I feel like this doctor must have been frustrated at some point with just the lack of detail, like he knew, or he probably suspected he was going to get with the measurements that he had, the availability. Right off the bat, like I would want something dialed in. I wouldn't want to have to guess on how much something fluctuated in between the two bars.
So let's see. Bob, I just looked up how much someone's weight can fluctuate during the day, and an average adult's weight can fluctuate 5 to 6 pounds. Did they account for that? We don't know. There's nothing in there that talks about that. The only thing we have is a little bit of information for, I think, 2 patients on how much weight was lost before they concluded they had died. And that's it. There's nothing, there's no details in here. And that's one of my biggest problems. So they didn't do that. I think, what was it? Melissa had made a comment. I believe the diet for tuberculosis patients was the same across the board. Not that it matters now. True. And then one more thing, JD, maybe, let's see, he missed this. But why would anyone assume a soul has weight or could be measured? Wouldn't it mean it would have to be necessarily corporeal? I read a quote McDougall said, based on talking about the soul, it appears to me more reasonable to think that it must be some form of gravitative matter and therefore capable of being detected at death by weighing a human being in the act of death. Basically, his argument was because if there's a soul there, it has to interact with your physical body. So it has to have some sort of weight to it because it's incorporated into your physical body. So if it goes away, something has to go away. And I got something to bring up later. There's another researcher these days that would like to repeat this in a closed system with all kinds of fancy electronic monitoring, everything from static electricity to electromagnetic fields, and looking for weight loss during death, because his thought is going back to the old E = mc squared, energy = mass times the constant speed of light. What happens is if you lose energy, I don't know. That's the right definition.
I was starting to say
the right definition. If you lose energy, you're going to lose mass, and if you lose mass, you're going to lose energy. So his thought is you need to monitor both things in a closed system, where you basically put somebody in a box on an extremely sensitive scale with a lot of different monitoring devices.
I want to point out that because we're talking about the lack of details and, you know, not knowing certain things in what he published in the American Society for Psychical Research, he writes after his 6th patient, he talks about it not being a fair test, that the patient died almost within 5 minutes after being placed on the bed, and died while he was adjusting the beam. But he notes here, in my communication to Dr. Hodgson, I note that I have said there was no weight loss or no loss of weight. It should have been added that there was no loss of weight, that we were justified in recording. And then he goes on to tell you about there was a loss of weight because they jarred the bed and it didn't stop, but they had recorded a full 1.5 ounces. So he's telling you he didn't think it was worth recording these details.
Right.
And that tells me this was just a poorly documented experiment.
Right.
Added on. I don't know if you can say it was a poorly executed experiment, but I think it was. But poorly documented, because he's like, you know what? I don't think this needs to be recorded. that's not recording data that you need to record.
Yeah, and again, talking about missing data, Melissa, question, definitely something that would affect the study more now than it would have then, but were medications a factor? If the study were to be recreated now, so many medications would have an effect on weight. Yeah. And again, they don't provide any of that. I mean, in a typical medical journal article, that if you did something similar to this today, you'd have all kinds of patient characteristic and physical data. I mean, you would have a whole ton of different things, and that would all
take a long time to read.
Because what they want to do is rule out those confounding factors that might be playing into the weight loss that doesn't have anything to do with what you're trying to look at. So no, they didn't. That's the problem. Again, every one of literally anything we just told you is about all that they relayed in the journal article. And the weird thing is he published 2 journal articles at the same time, the same year, one in American Medicine and one in the the Journal for the American Society of Psychical Research. Mm-hmm. And it's literally the exact same article, which is very bizarre, at least by today's standards, because you wouldn't publish in one journal, copy paste and put it into another journal. That's really rare and unheard of. They don't really go for that these days. So there's a lot of problems just with the scale. So any other comments on the scale, on the methodology? Because once we get through that, I want to kind of put the data up and kind of take a look at it.
I mean, I guess I just want to add and just make sure people understand, like, this is what we're pinpointing here. The flaws, the obvious flaws in these experiments once you start reading about it. And the underlying issue here, which you should this is the lesson for the entire show, is that don't take something like this at face value. Don't just repeat it later on. Look at the study, because you'll figure out it's bullshit. There's a lot wrong with this. I mean, it doesn't happen in every case, but with something like this, don't just repeat, hey, the soul weighs 21 grams. No, it fucking doesn't. And I can't wait till we get to the weights.
Well, it's crazy. They didn't even know when they really died, because at one point he said, well, we weren't sure when this patient died, so we threw it out. It's like, well, then how the hell are you sure when everybody else died?
I mean, Tim, you mentioned it about there's no EKG, there's no leads on them, so they don't know. They had 2 observations. One doctor was looking at the patient's chest. The other doctor was looking at the facial twitches.
But they checked the heart too.
Well, they only checked it when they were almost certain that they were dead.
Right. Right.
So the moment of death, the exact moment of death when the scale would go was when both doctors said that the lungs had stopped moving and the face had stopped twitching. That was what they calculated as the moment of death. And then they checked the heartbeat.
But how do you even know? You're assuming that as soon as your heart stops, your soul leaves.
Exactly.
Why doesn't it leave beforehand? If you know you're dying, why stick around? Wouldn't you be like, I'm out of here. This sucks.
I'm out. If you're into reincarnation,
or why wouldn't it take 10 minutes after you die instead of a couple minutes or a half hour or an hour? Because the understanding these days is the body and actually the brain takes a fair amount of time to wind down. It's not immediate where everything stops and that's it.
Right.
And, I guess maybe jumping the gun a little bit, but if something dropped and if something left, why are they assuming it's a soul? Or, maybe it was a demon. Maybe this person was
well, that's where the animals came in because they gained weight.
maybe it was possessed. Maybe the demon was like, job done. He's dead. Let's roll. Let's get to another one. Why are they assuming, I guess, or maybe not even assuming, but maybe what about questioning anything else?
The second patient, it says the last 15 minutes he had ceased to breathe. So this guy was apparently not breathing for 15 minutes, but his facial muscles still moved convulsively. And then, coinciding with the last movement of the facial muscle, the beam dropped. And then the weight loss was found to be 1/2 ounce, and then they checked the heart to see if it had stopped. So, yeah, I mean, you're talking about the guy stopped breathing, but his muscles were twitching in his face.
That happens.
That happens. I mean, that you can be on the you could be on the morgue table.
And there's times people's arms shoot up and scare the living shit out of people.
So their method of determining death was invalid. As far as
imprecise by today's standards, those standards. I mean, I'll be a little fair here, based on the time frame and what they knew of medicine and death and dying back then. They were operating under I think the best knowledge they had at the time.
Yeah.
Today, no, it doesn't meet that standard. But again, even with that, there's a lot of different problems with this. Mm-hmm. A lot of problems. And I think the point Kenny made is very well taken and is a major reason we're talking about this. People preach that this is a determined, agreed upon thing, that the soul weighs 21 grams and when you die, you lose 21 grams of weight. No, that's not true. The study's flawed as hell. It's awful. And it isn't awful. To me, I'm going to show the data. I would argue it might not be 21 grams. How do you know that? Why did you throw out all the ones except for the first patient?
I also want to point out that grams is not fucking.
It's ounces. I had to switch it to grams so I could do a calculation.
But it's not in the fucking paper.
Yeah, it's ounces. So somebody converted it to grams. Why not pounds? Nobody gives a shit what a gram is in the U.S.
Right. Like, why isn't it called the 3/4 ounce experiment? And for that matter, the whole point, the actual question that brought us together on this was, why is it called 21 grams if when you calculate everything, when you transfer it all over into grams, only one patient out of 6 measured that?
Oh, we're gonna have fun with the data. That's gonna be good.
So yeah, I mean, fuck.
All right. So quick question here. Do we know what Christian religion the experimenter was? No, we do not. The reason I asked if it was Catholic, did the Catholic Church weigh in on this? No, but in the newer experimenter that wants to try this, he actually tried to get funding from the church to support it, because he's like, boy, if I could actually find that there was a weight loss and I could connect it to energy and mass, then that would be a good argument for the church. And I guess the church was like, oh, hell no. We don't want you going down that. They tried to talk him out of it, and then they got into some crazy things about, oh, you might open a can of worms you don't want to here. And it was strongly discouraged, at least with the modern day researcher wanting to take a look at it. But I'll give them credit. That's pretty ballsy and pretty ingenious to ask the church to fund your study to look for the soul. But you could have probably figured out that it was going to be a big no. So Bob says the methodology seems to confirm confirmation bias. I don't know if the methodology confirms confirmation bias. I think the way, or the half-ass, whatever reason way he decided to throw out certain data points and select only things, to me, that's more of the confirmation bias problem. I don't know. Tim, what do you think?
I want to, something that I ran across with that, how I found out was called Dr. Cullis's consumptive home, which is this is just something that's on, I think, the campus of what it was. Don't know how true it is, but just to kind of aim at maybe what you were talking about there earlier with the post was, Dr. McDougall had approached several other tuberculosis centers and was refused. This consumptive home was run by Dr. Cullis, C-U-L-L-I-S, I think, which his preferred treatment was prayer for these patients. And I'm sure that they had some type of medications and stuff, but it was basically just give them a nice, comfortable place to pass on. It was when Dr. McDougall met this person that he agreed and was like, yeah, like, let's roll with that. I don't know what faith exactly they each were, but I did find it interesting that at least in this text that I found, which was only in one, preempting the test, was that he had been turned down by other centers until he found this one.
All right. Anything else we want to discuss on the methodology before we take a look at the data they collected?
No, let's dive into this.
Okay. All right. So to make this easy, and this might be a little hard to see.
Got a graph.
Yeah, because there's just so much going on here. It's going to be a little hard to read, but I'll go through it. So patient 1, I list the patient. The graph below shows the actual loss in grams. I converted everything to grams because everybody wants to call it the 21 gram experiment. But really, why don't they call it the 21.26 gram experiment? Because that's what patient 1 actually lost. So patient 1 lost 21.26 grams. Patient 2 lost 51.71. Patient 3 lost 42.5. Patient 4 lost 14.1. And patient 5 lost 10.63. And patient 6 lost 42.52. And then I had a dig. I found out the sex of each patient. And then only for the first 2 do they describe how much weight they lost from when they were put on the scale until the time that they determined was death. So for patient 1, they lost something like 28.35 grams per hour for 3 hours and 40 minutes. So that's actually it's a slow weight loss. So it's 28.35 per hour. Now, remember what they said that was lost at the time of death was immediate. It was within usually a couple minutes, couple seconds, and it dropped pretty fast. So before death, patient 1, 28.35 grams per hour. And that happened for 3 hours and 40 minutes. They had that loss of weight. Patient 2, they lost 21.26 grams per hour for each hour for 4 hours that they were measured. And then at the time of death, they dropped a rapid. So these are rapid drops. This is just the gradual before death loss. So the actual rates, while these numbers look the same, you got to remember this is 28 grams per hour versus an immediate drop of 21 grams. So the rates are certainly different. The comments they made about each patient, patient 1, whatever reason, that's ideal conditions. That's ideal. We love that one. 21 grams. That's where we got it from, I guess. Patient 2, it was a very gradual death. Not sure when they died. Okay, so that sounds like some of the other patients. Patient 3, there was no comment. Just patient 3 lost, and there it is. He didn't seem to have much of a problem with this until you read later on where he had a problem with all of them except the first one.
What's funny is like patient 3 has literally 3 lines of text in the entire. I feel so bad for patient 3.
Patient 3 really just didn't get the respect for the
3 freaking lines. That's it.
So then patient 4 was female. Scale wasn't finely tuned, and there was interference from the people who were opposed to their work at the TB facility. And then patient 5, they added weights to bring the scale back up. So it lost 10.3. They added some weights to bring it back up. And then they removed the weights, and the scale didn't drop again for another 15 minutes. So right there, that makes me start wondering, is there something wrong with the scale? Or is there something completely wrong with what they're doing? Or as we get into the animal data later, were they just seeing these transient fluctuations and he just wasn't picking them up based on the way he had his experiment set up? And then patient 6, he says, not a fair test. Patient died within 5 minutes, died while adjusting the beam. Well, that one, I might give him that one. Then he said no weight loss that justified recording. But as Kenny already told us, he went back and said, well, I shouldn't really say there was no weight loss. There was weight loss, and it was actually 42.52 grams. It just wasn't justified in recording it, which is absolutely ridiculous. So then there's a comment about accidental shifting of the sliding weight on the beam. So actually what I did is I took all of these, he threw them out. I don't really know for sure. Some of them I see, maybe they bumped it, or the one here where it wasn't finely tuned and there might've been some interference, may not have been a fair test, died within 5 minutes. I don't know if I buy that one, but they did die while adjusting the beam. But if we take all their weights and you get an average, the actual mean is 30.47 grams. So the question is, why wouldn't you call it the 30.47 gram experiment?
That's just not a catchy headline though. That's 21 just seems to ring. People would buy the paper for that.
So the data is all over there. And I'm not going to show what I did next, but I dug in. I found what the average weight of a male and a female were in the early 1900s. Then I looked at the average weight loss of a TB patient. Then I calculated based on that, what percent of this loss that you're seeing reported, what percent of theoretical total weight it would be. And it was, where was that here? It was, I'm not going to flash that because that gets into all kinds of stuff, but it's really, really, really low. It's between 0.021% and 0.1%. So you're trying to detect, and this is theoretical because they didn't give the before and after. I had to extrapolate on some data that I found, as I said. But if you're trying to measure, you're measuring a weight loss of 0.02 to 0.1 of their supposed body weight. When you plug that into a whole bunch of statistics calculators and you look at what would be the statistical power to detect that change, typically for a good stats analysis and an experiment, you want 80% power. This came out to 2.5 to 5%. So it's way, way underpowered for what they're trying to do and detect. And maybe he did run those numbers and decided, well, we probably don't want to put those in the paper. That's going to look bad. So anyway, comments. I'll toss it over to Tim to have a first go at this one.
Yeah, I took statistics twice in college, so I trust you.
You're twice as good as it. You're twice as good as I am, then.
I don't think it works that way.
Oh, okay.
I just watching the comments. I think that one of the things I know it's not too much on the statistics of this, but it's been brought up a couple of times about the sample size of this as well. And I want to just kind of agree that there it is. Yeah.
It's very small. That's why the power is so low.
Yeah. And I don't, was there a reason and I didn't find it, but it was on it was a question that I had, like, what caused it to stop at 6?
I think he was having I think he was having difficulty convincing the people at this facility to go along with this.
Yeah.
My other thought was that it made it into the newspapers and the media, and I think that actually fucked up his chances to keep doing this. Because let's be fair, he did admit this needs to be repeated big time. He never made any.
That's true.
I saw that about that.
Mm-hmm. And I agree completely with Kenny. I think this is going to be. I don't want this to kind of cop out, but I do think that he did the best that he thought he was doing at the time with what he had. Given that even he at sometimes put in what he thought and saw were errors and problems with his testing, and even with the publication, like we talked about, he even said this is too soon. Like it needs a lot of replication. I'll give that to him. I mean, what else can you do? It just, it seems like that's all he had. And I think it's easy to look back and kind of see where he's at and see the problems. I would, the documentation though, it feels like the documentation would have been better, especially coming from a medical student that went through med school on at least that part of documentation. But I don't know, like you said, like after it got published, maybe some of the documentation just is lost to time over somewhere.
Yeah, I did read, and I have it. It's in Spook. It mentions that he was halted by the officials. He had some friction already going on because I think his second patient, or was it the fourth? Something that where the staff intervened and gave him some trouble, but we don't actually know what kind of trouble. But I think it just went from there. Yeah, the fourth patient. From there, they just stopped it and they wouldn't let him do it anymore. That's why he moved to his house. I think he set up a lab in his house for the dogs when he started doing the dogs. So they weren't at the facility; they were at his house when he did that. And then nobody else wanted him to do the experiments at their facilities, right? So because of the backlash in the media, which is wow, we still get that shit.
So, John, also, isn't this an extremely small sample size? Yes, that's why, I thought it was going to be small. And then that's why I went down the path of what was the percent change from their starting body weight, because you're trying to detect such a small difference that typically when you want to detect a very small difference in something, you need a big sample size to make it valid. And as I said before, you want to have about what they call statistical power. You want to have 80%. And this only had 2.5 to 5%. So it was extremely underpowered. And that's because of the small sample size and what they were trying to, or what they found as far as the changes.
Okay.
Let's see, what else do we have here as other people get their thoughts together. So what would a control be? That's a good question. And my first thought is, you could compare it to, just similar weight loss over time in other TB equally age and weight matched patients. You could take a look at that. But the simple thing you could do is do multiple measurements, repeated measurements of the patients. So do it at the very least, report their weight before they put them on the damn scale. Where were they? What had they been doing up until that point, until they started actively dying? So that would be within patient control. And then also take a look at what happened for, let's say, 2, 3, 4 hours after they died. Leave them on the scale and see what happens then. So to me, you could have done before and after as sort of a within patient control, but you could age, weight, match against others that had TB that were similar and characteristic to these patients that passed away. Any other thoughts, guys?
I agree. And if this experiment was to go on today, you'd have a lot more control, I think. You'd be able to determine clinical death, because you could account for that. And I mean, having the preparations, because the biggest thing is we don't know what they weighed before they went on the scale. All that scale was doing in this experiment was weighing a loss within 0.2 of an ounce. That was your range. You couldn't go any more because it would hit the top rail and it would block it from going anywhere. So you wouldn't have anything else. But you'd know clinical death. You would know biological death. So you would be able to determine this and keep it on for, I don't know, 3-4 hours, but consistent. At least keep it consistent. And anything else, I don't really know, because this is not something I'm not qualified to do this, so I don't know.
I would bet that there is equipment currently that you could easily, like the actual bed itself could be a scale.
They are.
You would, and it would record in the time, and like I just think the information that you could get would be almost infinitely more detailed and better at this point. Yeah.
And calibration. That's it. It's not a homemade, because let's face it, that's what this is. It's a scale with a homemade attachment. Right. This is not something that was from factory. It's not OEM. So it's something that he built onto it to make it work, which is not going to be reliable or calibrated, because now you're talking distances. It's not something that you're standing on top of the scale. You were talking about weights that are what's the word I'm looking for? Over a distance. You have weights spanning a distance away from the scale, so that's going to affect it too.
That's true.
Yeah, that's going to have a major effect on it. It's not going to be an accurate reading. Wow, I didn't even think of that before. Shit.
Yeah, and you would have to calibrate it to account for that. I mean, it's going to be like a fulcrum in different levels.
Yeah, exactly.
Levels, but that goes back to, like you said, like who calibrated it? Like,
right.
Yeah, did they calibrate it? That was a great question. Like, did they look at the mechanical? Did they make sure the mechanical pieces were in good working order?
And they're using weights to bring it back up to balance.
Right.
And that would be off, because it wouldn't, your 1 ounce weight on the bed, depending on where they put it. Like if they put it right next to the scale, as opposed to maybe the patient's shoulders, that might be a distance of like 4.5 feet, 5 feet, who knows? And that wouldn't be accurate either. That would make a difference.
Right.
Wow, this is more fucked up than I thought.
So was it normal practice to document those types of stats on patients back then? I've seen some really old medical journal reports, and some have very detailed information about stuff like that, and others don't. But I think if you're doing something in a controversial science like this, you might want to err on the side of caution and report everything you can.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Let's see. JD says, oh, I don't know. He says something here. There it is. How about measuring a soul entering a body, measuring weight change in pregnant mothers? I get, sure, why not? We can do that. But then again, when's your thought and when it actually enters? The soul enters, and how are you going to get rid of the? And I'm sorry, ladies. When are you gonna? How are you going to get that out of the background of normal weight gain? Yeah, I know what you two are going to. We're just going to move along now.
Yeah.
So, any hate mail, please send it to Dave at
No, send it to JD. He asked the question. So, all right, John, question. Since we have people with NDEs, would it help with measuring? Like when they claim their soul leaves their body? See, that's the thing with near-death experience. It's near death. You're not actually dead. And they're not. I mean, when you die, you're gone. You're not coming back. It's near death. These people are revived.
You're not dead. You're like half dead.
You're just half dead. You're not at the point of no return. Let's put it that way.
You're mostly dead.
Mostly. Well, there's people have NDEs where they're in life-threatening. They think they're in life-threatening situations, but they really weren't.
That's something I don't even benefit of the doubt. If that's possible, you couldn't experiment on it, because those situations are not only random, but you also most likely, when they're taking place in a hospital, they're surrounded by staff that are actively working on them. So there's no way
weight would be a problem.
Yeah.
Maybe for an NDE, maybe one of those beds that consistently monitor weight loss would be very interesting to use in surgical centers.
This is a good question. I like this. Let's go around. Kenny's going to answer it first. In each of your opinions, do you consider an experiment like this ethical?
I am, first and foremost, I'll give the disclaimer. I am not on the ethics committee. I am not on the ethics board. So my opinion is just this, but I mean, why not? I mean, it's not, you're not bringing harm to a person. You are, I mean, in these cases, these people were terminally ill. They were going to die. There was nothing they could do to reverse that. So it's goes along with giving your body to science after you die. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're helping an experiment. I hear myself. I hear like my echo coming through one of you guys.
Let's do it. Not swag for that.
Okay. So do I find it ethical or not ethical? I don't think there's a problem with it. I as long as there's consent, and that's a problem because the way it describes it in here and the way it describes it in here, these people may not have been of sound mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it may have been like, hey, you know, we're going to use this for an experiment, sign here. And the patient had no fucking clue. You know, so that would be an ethical concern to me. Making sure that there was verification that the patient agreed to it and was able to agree mentally with this decision.
Right. Okay, Tim?
I think the issue is consent, just like you said. As long as they have informed consent, as long as they are able to consent, as long as they understand, you know, there's no code. Yeah, there's
NDR.
Do not resuscitate.
As long as they're ready to go and maybe they can have their own say in how comfortably they go or whatever naturally. You know, I'm sure at some point somebody would have something that I can't think of, and I surely am not that deep into medical ethics, but the first thing that comes to my mind is informed consent, exactly what it's going to be used for, exactly how that information is going to be shared. Make sure that somebody can absolutely, on a sound mind, sign permission for that. Outside of that, I don't, and I'm sure there's probably going to be an argument that I'm missing, but I think about it for me, and that's probably not fair to do for other people. But as long as I understood it and I had the ability to sign and consent with everything that I had, I mean, I don't see them hastening or causing harm or more distress. I don't see anything there where it might be unethical.
Yeah, I agree with you both. I don't see it being unethical as long as you got permission from the participant before and when they were of sound mind. I think that's, but I mean, yeah, ethics that's a tough thing. They have entire ethics committees for research experiments at research facilities, at hospitals, at universities. So, you know, they might look at this a lot differently. And one of the things they're going to look at is public perception. Let's face it, it doesn't matter, if you're donating your body to science or not, and you're okay with it, it's going to be the perception that comes along with it. And they're going to weigh that pretty heavily. And there's going to be pressure by religious and non-religious people, because they're going to have a vested interest in this. And they're going to come up with an excuse of some sort of ethical dilemma on doing this or not. But I mean, there's a lot of it. I mean, Sam Parnia is doing experiments on NDEs where they're putting hidden messages and symbols in the ceiling in emergency rooms. They're not asking people to, they're asking the facilities to participate, but obviously the people who come in and have a medical condition and have a near-death experience, they're not really asking them ahead of time, hey, do you mind if you, when you go through this, can you take a peek up in the ceiling if you're up there? And then we're going to talk about it afterwards.
Right.
So I think, there's a lot of questions that would happen there. Me personally, if I wasn't asked to do it, I wouldn't have a problem doing it. I would sign off on it. And I as long as I'm comfortable and you're not pushing me along to croak, and it's a comfortable thing, and I'm being taken care of, and you're just taking measurements, personally, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But I don't serve on any ethics committees, so
yeah,
I really don't know.
And that would be something that would have to pass an ethics committee today.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you're just not going to do it without approval.
Yep.
But it's like I mean, you're going to die anyway. Like in these cases, these people were going to die. And it wasn't, I mean, it's sad, but there was absolutely nothing they could do. So, yeah, if that was me and I was coherent, I would say, yeah, sure. If you can make me high as fuck, that'd be great. I mean, I really appreciate it.
All right. So you guys want to take a break, and then we'll come back, and I'd like to quickly talk about some of the other issues and questions, take just a quick look at the animal studies that have happened, and then close it out.
Sure.
Sounds good.
So break time. We will be back, and I believe it's like 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
All right.
All right, bladders are empty, and
oh my god,
glasses and bottles are full again. All right, so to wrap up the ethics debate we were having, Jade Kitten asks, even if you didn't have permission, how would it be unethical? I think doing any data collection or any experimentation on anybody is unethical without their permission.
You need permission. And I think didn't we do an episode where we talked about this?
Oh, yes, about when they were doing the infrasound and pumping the stuff in on that TV show.
And there was a way to do it if you're kind of like out in public and more like observational. You can observe people and collect data, but like it was a certain circumstance. I forget what it was, but I think we went into it. But otherwise, yeah, and this is not just like observing somebody from a distance. You're moving them. Your hands are on them. You're touching them. You're checking their vitals, whew. So you need permission to do that. You don't touch without consent. I mean, there's no good Samaritan laws here. This is like you need consent.
Then you're talking about people dying and the whole question of making them comfortable and easing them through that process. And you definitely need consent.
Yeah, because what happens if you load a patient or you start loading a patient and they go into some kind of distress where it's agonizing? You need to be able to make sure they're okay and first, provide whatever kind of aid they need, but make them comfortable. Yeah. So,
okay. So, just a couple other quick comments I have, other issues, questions, possible explanations. I mean, they did explore air leaving the body. McDougall actually got on the contraption there and expelled a bunch of air from his lungs, and he said that did not account for the amount of weight loss that they recorded. They talked about insensible water loss, and in Mary Roach's book Spook, she talks to Eric Ravusin, I believe the name is. He is a researcher at Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he's taken a look at what people lose in weight while they're sleeping. So this insensible water loss, and he found it occurs at a rate of about 1 ounce per hour, which is pretty similar to what McDougall found in the people before they actually passed away. That rate is similar. And this Eric from Pennington Biomedical, he doesn't think that the insensible water loss, it just doesn't explain the instantaneous drop at death that they saw in that experiment. So that one was talked about. Body fluid, excrement. McDougall claims that wouldn't have been a problem and it wouldn't have accounted for it because the way he described the contraption, if they did do that and they had clothes or blankets and cloths on them, that it would have stayed on the scale. So they don't think that was it. Could people have bumped the scale? I think that's a huge concern here.
Especially if they're very close watching the vitals. They were close enough to see the.
I wonder.
And if you're going to lean over and you finally see them stop breathing, you're going to actually try to check for a heartbeat. You got to touch it somewhat.
You got to kind of push a little bit too.
And how do you know you're not bumping? Maybe that's what he meant by the fact that only patient one was ideal conditions. Maybe they could guarantee there was no bumping, and they watched the scale when they checked for a heartbeat. And I don't know, but to me that's a big concern. Not to mention, I have a concern about the scale being wiggy anyway.
Yeah.
I'm
all the way through.
Curious. So I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about distribution of weight. If a person, if the body relieves itself and urinates or defecates on the bed, now you have a shift of weight because it goes from your bladder, goes out through the exit, and soaks the blanket in a different location. And we already have an issue with weight distance from the scale. So I wonder, and I'm just curious now, I'm thinking out loud because I don't know the answer. I wonder if that shift in weight from a full bladder if it's enough. And again, I don't know, but we might talk about an ounce or two of like water weight of urine that comes out. And if that shifts a foot or so from bladder to wherever it ends up and soaks in, would that change? Could that change on the scale? I don't know. I have no idea.
We don't, because we don't know exactly what the setup was. Now,
right.
Yeah.
From what I read, I thought they either had clothes on or they were wrapped up in blankets. So even though there would be a little bit of a shift, I'm not sure the shift would be enough to cause the scale to change, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Because if you have a finely balanced scale, and if it's not equal on all like 4 pillars or 5 equal weight distribution, obviously if anything shifts, you could see at least a transient change in it.
Yeah. And it might be, and if it's already off center, if the scale was already off center for the patient, I don't know. That's an experiment. I'm totally going to set this up for science. I'm going to pee to bed.
You got to video it for document. Yeah.
Good to hear Kenny's going to sacrifice for science.
I'll take one for the team.
All right. Bob asks, if someone were to replicate the experiment now, how many patients do you think minimum would be a good number of experimentees? Obviously, I'm just looking for your opinions. Well, there's actually a way to figure that out. And the one thing this study would do is give you an idea of the potential change that you're looking for. So you can go online. There's calculators online. You can plug in a bunch of different variables, basically, what your alpha level is, what power you want, and then what change you're looking to detect, and it'll spit out a number for you. So off the top of my head, it's probably way more than 6. I want to guess it's probably going to be north of 100.
It's going to be a lot.
But that's got to be taken into account of what you would actually have to do the experiment. You might not be able to do that for 100 people. So there's these things you have to balance. It's like, okay, so if you run the experiment really tightly and you have a closed system and highly accurate scales, you probably can get away with a lot fewer people because your data is just better. The problem with the scale he was using, it was all over the damn place, which means the variance is incredibly high, which means you need a lot more people to work out that noise. With a modern system and more accurate and a closed system, I don't know. I really don't know. I'd have to look into it, but it would be more than 6. But I really don't know. You'd have to really talk about the trade-offs and how accurate and what you're gonna try to detect with the equipment you have. I would say it's gonna have to be, I don't know, 20 to 100 is just off the top of my head guess. I don't know.
I have no. That's a Dave question.
I'd actually have to tell you the truth. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to run the numbers. And the one thing this experiment did do is provide us some preliminary data to plug into that to see how many you would need with a current modern system.
Yeah.
All right. So anything else? Any other thoughts on problems, possible explanations, other issues before I want to just dive into some of the animal stuff real quick?
Just real quickly, coming across, I wanted to go into more research looking for the information about this, but a lot of refuting this was about right after death, the body heating up because the air can't cool in the lungs, and it causes a lot of dissipation through sweat. I really wanted to kind of figure out how much someone would sweat at what amount of time. I know that the first patient one was an immediate drop, but then there's the other ones. It was very interesting to me about that. I didn't know that the body would, until this, took a quite quick rise in temperature. But that was one of the things I ran across. Unfortunately, I did not get to actually kind of look that up and see. what that actually is.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the animal data. So McDougall also did measured dogs that he euthanized. I believe, what was it, 12 or 15? 15.
15, yeah.
15. And he claims there was no weight loss at all. And one of the conclusions was, well, that's because animals don't have souls. That seems reasonable. The other argument, as you read further into Mary Roach's book and some of the other articles and other things people have written about this, is, somebody did the calculation. Well, if you look at the weight of the dog and you look at weight of a human and what was calculated as the weight of the human soul, a dog's soul might be 1/40th of the weight of a human soul. So, of course, the scale he was using would not have detected that weight change.
Son of a bitch! What a great little what a great little tag that was.
Sounds like some really good reasoning there. And then they also a experiment in 2001 published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. They did the same type of thing with sheep, ram, lambs, and goats. And let me put this back.
Only a matter of time before we talked about sheep.
Yep. Oh boy. So anyway, what they found, which is interesting, is with the sheep and the ram, there was a transient increase in weight at the moment of death. But they did not see that for the goat or the lambs. And if you look at this, this is interesting. So here's the weight versus time for sheep number 3 that was near death in the upper left-hand corner here. Weight in kilograms, this is where they started. And then the heart signal, steady, erratic, and then at the moment there was none. You see this increase, and then it drops back down. Same thing with sheep number 7 near death. It's all over the place. It's fluctuating. And these scales were digital data recording, highly precise and sensitive. So this is a much better experiment. If you read through this paper, it shows how you probably should do it these days if you were going to repeat it even with humans. A lot more information, a lot more data. They talk about the scale, the digital scale, and how it's so much better and the way they did it. And there's a lot more background information. But it's interesting. What they saw is about this 5-second transient, 4 to 5 second transient of when the heart stopped, there was an increase, and then it dropped back down to what it was before the heart actually stopped. The one thing I did note is that if you look on the very left on the y-axis here, 89.1 kilograms. And then if you were to draw over where it actually ends up at the end, it is lower from where it first started. And it drops to about 0.75 kilograms. So the difference is about 0.25 kilograms, which... if you multiply that out in grams, it's still quite a difference compared to what McDougall was finding. So this would be, it'd be 0.075, so 2.5. So it'd be actually about 25 grams. So the question becomes, was what he was seeing really anything, or was it just... It's similar to maybe some of the animal stuff, because again, this one it drops a little bit there. This one's pretty flat, and it looks like it goes up and stays pretty flat. So to me, there's still so much variability going on here, and I think the scale used in the 1900s, it's not that precise enough. I don't care what he says about sensitivity being down to 0.2 of an ounce. The problem is, if you look at this experiment, it's bouncing all over the place. And with the scale that was used in the 1900s, I don't think he could tell he couldn't tell that really. It could have been moving just a real little bit and you would never have seen it.
And even, I mean, yeah, we're talking about the analog scale, you know, they're looking at what the point that goes through the opening that's balanced. So we're looking at that, and there's a space, there's a good, like an 1.5 inch, 2-inch space there that it wobbles between. So there's no way you're going to get an exact measurement by just looking. That's a guesstimate by any standards. So we have no idea. I mean, the numbers that we have for the 6 patients, they're definitely not accurate. It's a guess.
And it's interesting that he says weight loss, and now with the animals, they're seeing a transient increase and then a drop back.
That's maybe that's the soul bouncing like a trampoline.
Maybe there's like a little soul diving board that you have to spring off of.
It's like, all right, we're done.
Here we go.
Boing.
There's one more. Some guy in 1979 published a study with mice, twinning, the search for the soul. I think it's you can, I'll have to look up the reference, but again, mice, nothing, no increase, no decrease, just nothing. So dogs, supposedly nothing, lamb, nothing, goats, nothing, mice, nothing, humans drop weight, sheep have a transient increase.
Fucking sheep.
It's all over the place. It's all over the place.
Wow.
So let's see. Melissa has a statement. Kenny, my idea to absolve that issue in the event that the study got replicated, have the bed be the scale or have the bed on the scale, something to the effect of scales they use at the vet or something where they flush with the floor, where they're flush with the floor. That would be a good start. I think most hospital beds, I'm sure you could find a really expensive hospital bed that would give you some very decent weights.
When the entire weight is over top of the scale, yes. But when you have, and again, we don't have a sketch or a photo of this scale, so we don't know. We're going off of what we think, determined by what little information we have from this. But it sounds like all of the weight is not on the scale; it's balanced on the scale, which is not a good way to do it.
All right, Tim, question for you. What's that picture in your background there?
It is part of the compound where this was allegedly or took place. This is what we were a little earlier. Let me get the name of it again. So this is it's a large facility. It dates back a lot longer than just the 1900s. But when this doctor had it, it was the Dr. Cullis's consumptive home. So this was one of the buildings, if I have it accurately, that was on the compound, not necessarily the one that the experiments took place in, but just something, I guess, the architecture would look like at the time.
Okay. All right, John, question. I think it was in the book Spook, but didn't some scientists of the day suggest he account for things like breath, evaporation, etc.? And I think they did. And I think we talked about that a little bit with that insensible loss and the professor from Baton Rouge that did the study looking at people that were sleeping and how much weight they lost just through respiration and oxygen exchange and burning the food and eliminating carbon dioxide. They did look at that. McDougall himself actually got on the scale or on the contraption and exhaled all the breath he could. And they don't think that accounted for it. The biggest thing I took away from all that was the rate at which the weight was lost. At the moment of death, according to McDougall, it was fairly rapid. The other normal things you're talking about here, John, where there would be weight loss, it was a very slow rate of loss, very, very slow, and it wouldn't account for the rapid drops they supposedly saw at the time of death. All right, so I got one more thing. Future work. There's a OB-GYN physician, Gary Nahum, Nahum. He is a professor at the Duke University School of Medicine. He got his undergrad in chemical engineering from Yale and his medical degree from Stanford. So certainly not a stupid person.
That's a very bright person.
He's got some credentials there. And he was asked about this, and he's thought about this. And Mary Roach addresses it and talks about it in her book, Spook. And he says, if you wanted to do this, and he has a 25-page proposal on how to do this, and I'd love to be able to find that. It's called The Proposal for Testing the Energetics of Consciousness and Its Physical Foundation. And he thinks it would take about $100,000 to do this appropriately, but it would have to be in a completely closed and isolated system, which with the most modern, sensitive, precise scales that you could have today. But he would also want to measure other things such as electromagnetic fields, static electricity, electrical discharge, because he's going back to the whole fact that if there is actually a weight loss, there's got to be some sort of energy loss associated with it as well, because the whole E = mc squared. He's like, if you lose energy, you're going to lose mass. If you lose mass, you're going to lose energy. So that's why, to make it more valid, he would want to measure both mass and other aspects of energy that you could measure with fairly sensitive equipment these days. But $100,000 and trying to get somebody to fund that, I guess he hasn't been successful yet. He actually approached the church to see if they would fund it. And they said, no, we're not going to fund that. And now we're going to try to talk you out of that. I think they were going to perform an exorcism on him. No, just kidding. But yeah, there's people that are thinking about doing this and doing it the right way. And, why not? It would be an interesting study. I think, take a look at it, if not to detect the soul leaving the body, just to figure out what's going on with these past experiments. Why do you get increases in animals? Why do you get this decrease supposedly in humans? What's really going on there?
Right.
I would not have guessed 100,000. I would have guessed much more. I don't know why, but it may be just because of the ideal of the sensitivity and the amount of equipment. But 100,000 with a tagline like, let me check and see if you got a soul, sounds like you could get that done pretty quick on a Kickstarter or GoFundMe, actually. I mean,
all right, so we need to contact an ethics committee and then we're going to start a Kickstarter campaign.
I'm just saying that was 100,000 seems really,
it
really
seems
low.
small. Yeah, it seems very, very small. But I guess, all you really need is, equipment wise, well, you need use of EKG and doctor on staff. You need a bed. That's a scale, which
you're going to need a lawyer.
Well, yeah, there's your $100,000 right there.
Yeah, right there.
He's also talked about sacrificing a variety of other creatures. I think he specifically mentions leeches because he hates leeches. So you got to pick something you don't like so you don't mind killing it, I guess. Seems interesting. Anyway, all right. Well, that's all I had. You guys got anything else you want to talk about on this?
No, just, hell with them for killing dogs. That's all I got to say. That's just, I don't like it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think some would probably have more of a problem with that than waiting for the humans to die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm ready to wrap it up.
All right, let's wrap it up. So I will start with Tim.
I will give him, I guess, props for, again, I think it just goes back to, I do appreciate the fact that in some of the writings that I saw and that I read, he at least named some of the shortcomings and problems that he sees, which I appreciate. I also kind of think, you know, it just like today, who knows 100 years from now what they'll look at us and go, what the fuck were they thinking using that? Like you said, that was the Cadillac of scales. And maybe if that's what he had, then that's the best that he had. And I don't know. I'm certainly not going to use this or take this as any evidence supporting the claim that the soul weighs that much, or you have a soul, or it leaves the body when you die. I can't say there is or isn't one, but if you're going to cite this study to support that there is one, I'm not going to believe you. There was just so much wrong with this, and it would have been better if there were some more documented records on the methods and the equipment and the people and what they were doing and where they were, like the bumping of the scale. You know, that was a great point. You know, I didn't even think about if someone's sitting there, if they say, I think this patient's going to die, and they rush over and do, you know, put a stethoscope. Shit. I made it. I'm starting to get a little buzzed.
Flag on the play.
Stethoscope.
There you go.
I don't know, you know, who knows, but this isn't for me. This isn't the study to cite to say
Right.
There's evidence of a soul. I'm not going to say that there's not a soul again, but if you're going to state this as evidence, it's evidence of a evidence of a soul, then it's not going to work for me. I better stop before I keep stuttering. So I almost made it. Yeah.
All right, Kenny.
So yeah, as I said in the beginning, I'm going to repeat some of the stuff. This is a prime example of doing your due diligence, knowing the experiments, knowing the story behind the story before you cite it as an authority figure. Don't do it. This is something that we hear so many times over and over again. It's common knowledge. It's tribal knowledge, but there is no knowledge behind that tribal knowledge. It's just repeating ad nauseum. And when you dig into it, when you look at it, and I mean, we had an hour and a half discussion on this and pointed out so many flaws with this and such a lack of detail that this cannot be taken seriously, especially by people that don't bother to fucking read the study. You know, they just like, oh yeah, the soul weighs 21 grams. We know this. No, you don't. Shut the fuck up. That's not how it works.
I would just be a dick and counter and say, well, according to our calculations, it should be at least 30 grams.
Yes. I mean, if you're going to go, I mean, this really, the whole pet peeve that started this all was that 1 out of 6 could have been 21 grams. Again, you also have to take into account that you have that 5 gram leeway because it was accurate to within 0.2 of an ounce. But I mean, we don't know. Even reading the study over again, I think there was a problem with that because it sounds like it was just set to measure 0.2 of an ounce. That's not giving you the plus or minus accuracy. That's just telling you in 0.2 of an ounce, it's going to hit the bar. That's what I got out of it. And when I reread it, I was like,
basically says that's the minimum change it can detect. It's not telling you anything that's you're talking to the sensitivity. They forget to mention the precision and the accuracy.
Right.
What are those two things?
Right. And we don't know it. And as we've talked about, it's completely different than what it was. Not the same setup. It was not set up. It was not designed to accommodate that setup. It was designed to have silk placed on top of it, not onto a cot that was partially on top of it. So it was completely wrong. So the bottom line is read the research before you go and cite something blindly. Read it. Go look it up. I put the link to the PDF to the Journal for the American Society of Psychical Research of this, so you can go read the entire published paper. and then all the letters afterwards. There's a lot to it, a lot more than we've gotten into here. But you can read it for yourself and then have a better understanding. You will be better equipped to talk about it rather than just, seeing it on TV or seeing a movie by the same name and thinking, oh, I know everything about it. you don't know. So that's it. That's, and you know what? I mean, I'm not going to call it the 21 grams experiment anymore, because we had 2 cases that would be 10.6 on average, and then 2 more that were over 40 or 42. There were 2 42s. Yep. So, I mean, 42 is my favorite number, so I'm going to go with the 42 grams experiment.
42 is the answer to everything.
Everything.
So obviously it's 42.
Yeah.
So well, there we have it.
I'm going to stop bitching.
We solved it.
So I agree with you guys. I think it's incredibly flawed for various reasons that we talked about. And he threw out some stuff. He didn't throw out others. There's at least 1 or 2 other patients that he doesn't provide any good reasoning as to why he would throw them out, besides him saying patient number 1 was the best conditions. Okay, but you didn't comment on at least a couple other ones. I mean, you did on some that were no good, and you cited maybe legitimate reasons why you would throw them out, but there's at least 2 of them that you said you threw out everybody except number 1. But why did you throw out those other 2? Because you didn't say there was specific problems with them. So there's just all kinds of issues here. Yeah, and the fact that people are citing this as fact, no, because according to this author, they're basing the 21 grams on an N equals 1. One patient that he alone determined those were the best conditions. That is the one patient.
I might have taken statistics twice in college, but even I know N equals 1 sucks. So
yeah, you might want to replicate that a few times, and you might want to do it a little more accurately, precisely, and have a little more information involved there. So yeah, this is a good example of not taking something somebody says at face value and just believing it or repeating it. Go and read the paper. And I think as you saw how we picked this apart and analyzed it, it gives you some good ideas of what to look for when you read a paper like that. What are the shortfalls? What are they not reporting? If you need to put the data in a spreadsheet and graph it out and take a look at it and see if it makes sense to you, that's what you should be doing. Don't just accept that somebody told me this because somebody told me this because somebody told me this. It just doesn't work out that way. And yeah, just because it's published, that's another lesson. Just because it's published doesn't mean it's conclusive or it's actually even a good study. There's a lot of shit studies that get published these days.
Right. And
back in the, way back in the day. We're still kind of fumbling our way through the scientific method back in the early 1900s, and medicine was, a developing field. So there's just a lot of issues, problems, and I just don't think anybody should be stating this as fact at this point. The interesting thing for me is there is a drop that's a rapid drop that can't be explained. Maybe it's part of the scale problem, but then you throw in some of the animal stuff and there seems to be a transient increase and a drop that they can't explain either. So there's enough unknowns here that I think it probably be worthwhile to take a look at and try to design an experiment and implement one that would potentially answer this. But who knows if that's going to happen based on funding and ethical questions. So that's all I got, but it was a fun topic. I enjoyed it, and good way to start off the new year, I think.
Yeah.
Reminds me of a joke. What do you get if you cross an octopus and a cow?
What?
Your funding immediately pulled and a visit from the ethics committee. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
That was good.
Wait a minute.
And new for 2022, Tim has sound effects.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's close it out with what people have going on. I'll start. Saturday nights, 3 Tortured Souls. And let's go to Tim. He'll be the second shortest.
Saturday night, 3 Tortured Souls.
Excellent. And now to Kenny.
You guys suck.
We dedicate all of our time and focus on this show.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So Friday nights at my new time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific, is the Skeptical Help Bar. And you can come on. It's pretty much this show, but minus these two guys. It's just me. But you get Donna that sits off to the side. So she makes comments every now and then. And she likes to argue with me. So
we pop in once in a while and razz you.
Yeah, you guys pop in and give me shit. So it's all good.
We wouldn't be good friends if we did.
There's a couple things. Yeah. There's a couple things coming up, but everything is kind of iffy right now. Because I know the numbers with COVID are going back up. So even though I do have some stuff that I'm scheduled to go to, I'm kind of not announcing them too much yet. But I do plan on going to Gettysburg in August. And hopefully with these two jackasses, so we can set up a table and be jackasses together.
Yep, perfect.
Because we had so much fun last time we did it. But more information on that later as we as news develops and we get more information and updates and all that stuff. So, but that's it. So I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us for another fun year of Three Tortured Souls. We look forward to it. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next weekend.
Yay.
Take care.
Three tortured souls, three tortured souls, three tortured souls. Game with the real, this was the day. Game with the real, game with the real. Don't question me, take a piss about. Game is out, game is about. Close every room, hiding on TV. Three tortured souls, three tortured souls, three tortured souls, three tortured souls. And what you say, or you'll get to bed.